Okay, I am back. Sorry about that. I told y'all there would probably be some flubs here today, but we're going to pick up where we left off. So, we were talking about the hero's journey, the fact that these journeys can be external or they can be internal. So, I think when we left off, I was talking to you about what the characteristics are for an internal hero's journey. So these are stories where the hero must overcome some moral weakness, fear, inhibition, or physical shortcoming in order to accomplish the goal. So usually there's still an external reward for the journey. There's still something that has to be accomplished or something that can be gained as a result of this journey, but it's also about what's going on with the hero on the inside. And so, again, we're going to see quite a few stories as we work through the next couple of modules, where we're going to see heroes attempting to overcome these internal conflicts as well. He may have to learn lessons in basic human values. For sure, that is the case with the Epic of Gilgamesh, our first story that we'll look at next week. Basic human values, love, friendship, kindness, just simply learning humility sometimes, learning how to be a better human being. These are all, again, crucial elements of these stories. All right, let's talk about some typical characteristics of the epic hero. Now, do note here, we're talking hero journeys in the classic sense. These were the stories that originally came to us from usually European cultures, Greece, Rome. So these are the values that they tended to apply to these epics. And so, first of all, the hero is always going to be male. That's going to be a given because it's still pretty much a man's world at this point in time. Although, do not think for a minute that that means that there were no powerful females in these stories. There certainly were. And in many cases, what you're going to see is the hero is going to be pitted against these very powerful female forces, usually very powerful female gods, women in positions of power and authority who do have the ability to sometimes make life very miserable for these male heroes who have to try to go forth and try to conquer and do what they have to do in spite of the women who are trying to get them off the beaten path. But again, to get back to our original point, a hero must be male. He's going to be of noble birth, because these were not stories about ordinary people. These were stories about extraordinary people. They did not consider the average everyday person worthy of telling a story about. This had to be a person of some authority, some noble means, usually a person of noble rank, a person of royalty, or at the very least, someone who has risen to an esteemed position. He might be a great soldier, for example. They would consider that an esteemed position. Now, here's the kicker. The male hero needs to be usually at least half divine. So what do we mean by that? Oftentimes you'll see in these stories, he has at least one parent who is a god or goddess. So the idea is that he has been descended from a supernatural being, that he carries that in his genetic makeup. this explains some of his powers and abilities that he has as a hero. The downside of that is that he's also understood usually to be half mortal, because usually this comes about as a result of an alliance between a mortal and an immortal being, right? So on the one hand, he will possess superhuman strength, he'll possess some degree of magical ability, which is understood to be a result of his divine birthright, but he also has a human side, and that usually is used to explain his less than admirable qualities, the things that might make him weak, for example, the things that might create problems for him. Maybe he's too prideful, for example. That's understood to be a human trait, although we'll see that sometimes gods share these very human traits, and that's a whole other argument too, that we'll get into a little bit later. What came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Did humans come first, or did the gods that we create come first, or did gods create humans in their image, or vice versa? That gets very convoluted. But for our current purposes, just know that the epic hero is understood to be the product of such an alliance, that he usually does have at least one parent who is superhuman and one parent who is mortal. And so that those two qualities combined influence a lot of the outcome for the epic hero. One of the things you'll be doing in this module, you're going to be looking at a couple of episodes from the Myths and Monsters Netflix series. I'll be posting those episodes for you. If you don't have access to Netflix, never fear. Those are on YouTube, and I'll be posting them here. You will have a quiz on this presentation and on that first episode of Myths and Monsters. So these are some things that you need to be paying special attention to as you work through that episode, because these are the things that will come back in your quiz and your assessment assignments. So make sure that you can define myth and the purpose of myth. And by that, I mean according to what we've discussed in this lecture and what will be discussed in that episode. You can go online and read what somebody else says is the definition of myth, and that's okay. But I'm going to be holding you accountable for what you should be getting out of this module, okay? The contributions of Joseph Campbell to the study of mythology, you'll need to know what those are. You're going to have some interviews with Joseph Campbell coming up in this module that I want you to watch. But they're also going to talk about some of Campbell's theories in that first episode of Myths and Monsters. Know what we mean by the heroic journey, and what are some of those stages of the hero's journey. And also what transpires in each of those stages. Now, I will tell you, there are a lot of stages to the hero's journey, and it'll get very confusing for you if you try to keep up with all of them. You don't have to know all of them. What you should know are those main stages that the hero undergoes. And most of those, the ones we'll be most concerned with, are the ones in the first half of the journey. All right, so definitely, first of all, know the difference between ordinary world and special world. Those are the two big realms there. What is call to adventure? What is refusal of the call? What do we mean by supernatural aid? What is crossing the threshold? those are, I would say, overall the main stages that we'll be concerned about. Those are the ones most apt to come back, for example, on the midterm, on the final, the stuff that you really need to know. So I wouldn't worry as much about some of the later stages, because we won't have as much reason to really talk about those as much. But definitely those main stages. Oh, and also status quo, which is both the beginning of the journey and the end of the journey. Status quo is where we see the hero at rest in his environment. This is before the problem arises. So this is where we see the hero in his ordinary world, right? This is at home with the wife and the kids, and everything is fine and honky-dory, because the problem hasn't yet arisen that's going to require him to go on the journey. Once he circles through the entire journey, it ends at what we call new status quo, which is he returns to where he began, right? If he's undergone the journey successfully, he'll be back at the beginning. He'll be back at home in his environment with the wife and kids, but usually very changed by that point as a result of having undertaken this journey. And as they'll discuss in Myths and Monsters, this is a formula that we're familiar with. We see it over and over in countless movies, TV shows, etc. They're going to talk about Star Wars, for example, in that first episode. Again, it's a formula that Hollywood uses all the time because it makes sense to us, right? There has to be a beginning, then the conflict arises, the journey begins, the adventure begins, all kinds of trials and tribulations must take place because that's what keeps us engaged. Is he going to succeed in this mission, or is he going to fail? It's going to have to look like all is lost at some point. He's going to, be tested over and over, but he comes out the other end of it with mission accomplished, usually, and becoming a much stronger individual and in a better place to return to his world, having made some difference and having grown, his character arc having grown as a result of this journey. So again, this is not going to be new to you. This is something that we see all the time. If you watch enough films, if you read enough, you watch enough TV, you've seen this formula enacted. Maybe you just haven't known a name to put on it. Well, now you do. Okay, so in this module, you've got your task list, but you're going to be watching those episodes of Myths and Monsters. You're going to complete your quiz. There's going to be a discussion assignment on The Wild Unknown, which is that second episode of Myths and Monsters. And let's see, what else? A couple of interviews with Joseph Campbell, and I've got a journal assignment for you to complete after that. And just as a reminder, as we get into next week's module, we'll start to get into those modules where you will need to have your Norton Anthology textbook. So if you haven't gotten that yet, make sure that you have that before next week's module, because we'll start to get into the reading assignments from the text at that point. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to hit stop on the record, and you guys from here will progress on with watching the first episode of Myths and Monsters. All right, bye-bye.